afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Batchman. I'm with the Gordian Group. On behalf of the City of Chicago, Department of Procurement Services, I'd like to welcome you to the Job Order Contracting Procurement System, also known as the JOC Informational Seminar. During the discussion today, we'll have a brief overview of the job order contracting history. We'll cover points about contracting as a prime, to include some of the contract documents, contract specifics, bidding on a job order contract, procuring individual project awards, and just an open Q&A afterwards. JOC, by definition, is a part of the family of an indefinite quantity contract. There's a couple of them that are used throughout the country, WOC, DOC, the SABRE program, which is more federal, primarily military. And the government actually began using JOC in the mid-1980s to facilitate a procurement process that would allow them to have a delivery method for small to medium-sized construction projects. The Gordian Group was established in the mid-1990s and began doing work with the City of Chicago using the JOC program as a non-federal agency. Today, there's over 2,000 JOC projects, or programs, excuse me, utilized throughout the country with an estimated construction value of $1.8 billion annually that is performed through the JOC program. In 2005, Miami was recognized for the best of the best by implementing a JOC program, and more recently and locally, Cook County received an award in 2015 by the National Association of Counties, recognizing their use of job order contracting to facilitate a backlog of work that they've had on the books in their capital improvement development program, excuse me. JOC is another delivery method throughout the city that's used. They primarily use in-house trades, traditional bids, term agreements, and then job order contracting allows them to have another procurement method. The graph that you're looking at just sort of identifies the process as it goes from beginning to end. They identify a project, it's streamlined, joint scope meeting scheduled. The contractor prepares a cost proposal, which is reviewed and approved. The purchase order is issued, and shortly thereafter, the construction starts. JOC is not meant to replace any other procurement method. It just is another tool that they can use along with their other methods to procure construction. Typically, the first portion of the JOC program is considered an umbrella contracting process. This is where the prime contractor bids on the JOC program. The second part of it is where the individual jobs are procured. I will elaborate a little bit more later in the presentation as it relates to that. But this just shows the process where the prime responds to the advertisement, the bid advertisement, then they submit their bids. There's an umbrella award, which typically doesn't guarantee any work at that time, but the Part 2 process is where the owner identifies projects and assigns them to the JOC contractors. Currently, there are 7 City of Chicago departments that utilize JOC: Department of Fleet and Facilities Management, Aviation, Water Management, Planning and Development, Fleet and Facilities Management, their Environment section, the Office of Emergency Management, and the Department of Transportation. Similarly, there are other Chicago area JOC programs listed on the right side of this slide, but I sort of need to read this disclaimer because it's for informational purposes only. Any discussions in this workshop pertain to City of Chicago JOC programs, but we just like to highlight and show other agencies, sister agencies, and local municipalities that use it. If you do want to find some advertisements about these agencies, you need to look on their specific websites. The city's website does not advertise contracts for the agencies listed on this slide. So Again, there is for informational purposes only, but it's just to depict some of the sister agencies, as I mentioned: Chicago Public Schools, Transit Authority, Public Building Commission, Chicago City Colleges, University of Illinois, Cook County, Lake County, Naperville, which is also a county, and then locally, the United States Postal Service, which actually has a national program, but they have individual programs within certain regions. As far as the overview of JOC order contracting, they are considered a firm, fixed price, competitively bid, indefinite quantity delivery method. I mentioned earlier about the indefinite quantity, which is sort of the definition, but they are designed to produce large number of multi-trade repair and rehabilitation projects, as well as minor new construction projects quickly. The firm fixed price component of it relates to the construction task catalog, which is a pre-price book of tasks that have been generated, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. The competitive bid aspect is all bidders are required to bid adjustment factors, which are added to the prices within the construction task catalog. And the indefinite quantity portion of it really depicts the fact that there's no projects identified at the time of award. Typically, JOC projects are awarded on a basis of the client's anticipated construction span. That's not to say that they don't have projects in mind, but typically there are no projects identified at the time of bid or award. Once the master umbrella contract is awarded that I mentioned earlier, the job orders are issued individually and have the potential of going up to the total capacity of the awarded contract. Job order contracts are performance-based. A lot of people don't understand that component of it, but they are, and I will speak to a number of performance measures related to it. But one of the primary ones is the responsiveness of the contractor. After award, the performance is rated from project development phase through construction, startup to closeout. There's elements that go along with that I'll speak to in a second. The project development phase, where the contractor participates in the scope definition of the project. Timely and accurate price proposal development. The construction phase refers to the timely startup of the projects, effective management of the work crews and the subcontractors related in the projects, ensuring that the project is constructed according to the scope of work and specifications that were identified at the front end of the job, and success in developing a partnership with the owner. They work hand in hand as far as making sure that the owner's requests are met, and then the contractor obviously has to deliver. And performance also depends on the accuracy of the price adjustment factor that was bid on, and the quality of staff that they maintain to perform the projects that they're assigned. Next, I'd like to just touch on some of the other performance measures, but the quality of the price proposal, that ties directly into the adjustment factor. So in instances where a contractor may have an adjustment factor that doesn't match their costs, there will endlessly be conflicts as it relates to trying to get price proposals approved, which creates a little bit of a conflict between the contractor and the owner. The timely delivery of proposals, whether it's the first one or subsequent proposals that have to be submitted after a review takes place. Obviously, the timely of construction, which I talked about previously, the rapid mobilization to start the work, adhering to the construction schedule, and timely completion of any punch list items. The quality of construction, achievement in any specific compliance goals in WBE, and in the instances where there are self-performance goals, those have to be met as well. So all those tie into the overall evaluation, whether it's the client evaluating the contractor's performance or procurement's evaluation as it relates to the compliant components of the program. Prime contractors tend to benefit as well as subs, but I'll speak on the primes right now. The JOC program can be profitable, and the fact that profit is a function of volume. Volume is driven by performance, which I just spoke about. As long as the contractor is performing well, then the client should have no problem assigning additional work related to the program that, or the projects that they have lined up to complete under the program. JOC provides a steady flow of work. Typically, clients will have a list of projects, as I indicated earlier, as it relates to what they intend to do. They generally don't share it before the contract's awarded, but those discussions take place, and there is a flow of work that benefits the contractor. And lastly, the contractor never really has to chase work because the client typically has it lined up in queue and just will assign it either when they feel the contractor has, you know, the capacity to do it, or in some instances when it needs to be done. It's a goal to build a long-term relationship with the city, primarily that client that I was speaking of earlier. It shouldn't be an adversarial relationship, and that partnership just fosters, you know, quality construction and timely completion of the work that the client needs to get done. And lastly, typically projects are pretty professionally rewarding. There's a various slew of projects. Different departments have some specialties, but in most instances, departments like fleet and facilities management, they have a wide variety of types of projects that they will do, from interior renovations to major exterior rehabilitation. And lastly, one of the abilities the program provides is the contractor actually shares in the scope development process. So if they can recommend some techniques or methods that would assist in the timely completion or cost saving measures, then they're more than welcome to share that aspect and get the client's input on it as it relates to developing and agreeing on the overall scope of work. Subcontractors also benefit from the JOC program in that, as I indicated earlier, since no jobs are identified at the front end, typically the prime contractors do not staff up completely, which leads to subcontractor opportunities. The number of jobs, the type of jobs, and the fact that a lot of primes don't carry in-house trades a lot anymore all creates opportunities for the subcontractor involvement as it relates to the JOC program. And typically there will be more than one job running at the same time. Once the client builds up some confidence in the contractor's ability, then it's typical that they may assign 3 or 4 jobs that will be taking place at the same time in various areas of the city. So there again would be some opportunities for subcontractors to take part in the JOC program. Irma passed out some information earlier. This slide just sort of covers specifics as it relates to DPS alerts and their website. I believe the cards and information she passed out earlier should have that. Also, all bid announcements or advertisements are placed in the Chicago Sun-Times for people that are looking for any contract opportunities with the City of Chicago and or JOC type contract opportunities. Bidding as a prime contractor. The bidders are required to meet certain requirements as it relates to contractors' licensing, insurance, bonding, typical of any type of competitive bid process. Bidders must complete all the forms in their entirety as it relates to the bid process. Again, that's typical. To be successful, bidders should bid correctly and have a high quality management team. That bid correctly portion is tied directly to making sure that it's a complete bid, as well as the extra homework that you need to do as it relates to bidding your adjustment factors, which I'll speak a little bit more on in a second. Prime contractors must be able to manage multiple projects at multiple sites within with multiple subcontractors, which I alluded to previously. Previous experience is not required to be part of the program. Gordian is a consultant for the City of Chicago and is required to provide all the necessary training for new entrants, get them set up in the software so they can use it for their price proposal building. Excuse me. And any ongoing JOC related training that would be required as a new prime contractor. If you don't mind, yeah, we're tabling all questions until the end. This slide just depicts the checklist. It may be a little hard to see, but the document submittal checklist, it comes with virtually all competitive bids, and then the blue box just highlights some of the required prime licensing, insurance, bonding, things of that nature, which again is typical of most contracts. Now we're going to turn our attention to the contract documents. Typically, city contracts, city JOC contracts, excuse me, have multiple books involved. These 5 books here are pretty standard. Book 1 is the instructions to the bidders and the execution documents. I'm not going to say that's the most important book, but as it relates to what you're required to do for the bid, it has all that information. Book 2 is the city's general conditions and JOC special conditions, which some of it relates to specifically to the Gordian process and software aspects of the program. The 3rd book is the construction task catalog, which is the unit price book that is used to identify the task items. Book 4 is the technical specs, and when needed, book 5 will be the client or owner's specific specifications related to any items that they may have. That you find that a lot of times in specialty departments or whatever, like water, or in the case of Cook County Highway Department. Well, CDOT has it as well. CDOT has its own spec book that stands alone from book 4. This graphic depicts a sheet in the construction task catalog. Again, it's for informational purposes only, but if you go from left to right, you will see it's all set up in the CSI master format. Then the next item over is the full description of the task. In this case, we're talking about cast in place concrete curbs and gutters. If you drop down to the middle, it addresses modifiers. The modifiers typically address a quantity discount or increase for smaller quantities. So if it's a larger volume, there may be a quantity discount for the owner. And if it's a smaller quantity, there may be an increase for the contractor on that side. And then off to the right, as you move over, you have your price. All prices within the construction task catalog includes labor, equipment, and material. And lastly, if there is a demolition component, that price stands off to the side, and you would include both if you're installing and demolishing a particular task item. The book 4 again is the technical specs. They tie directly to the task items. It's required to optimize the savings and basically control of materials and methods of construction performance. Oops, sorry about that. So this graph just talks a little bit about the way the prices are adjusted. When you bid a contract or when you're awarded a contract, the adjustment factor is fixed for the term of the contract, but one of the terms of the contract is an annual adjustment to the factor. So the factor, it does increase. It's fixed, but the annual adjustment is to offset any labor and equipment, well, labor and material costs. So in this particular instance, it just shows a tracking over the course of since 1999 up to '09. And the adjustment is basically a construction cost index adjustment that is published in the engineer's news record, and it's worked up prior to the anniversary date of each contract and allows you that increase for that period, that next annual period. As I indicated earlier, prior to bidding, the city does not identify or commit to any project or location, nor do they identify or commit to specific quantities in the CTC task book. As far as the scope of works, those are designed or defined, by the owner, but they are sort of a mirror image of the construction task catalog. So when you identify a scope of work, the elements in the task catalog that are used to build the price proposal as a prime contractor tie directly to that scope of work. The contract includes, but is not limited to, various types of work to include renovation, site work, interior and exterior renovations. Typically, the fixed term of all contracts is 12 years. This is just for reference only. So if you work the math from the last 4 lines, 12-month contract for 3 additional 1-year options. The third line represents the max annual term of each contract. In this particular example, it would be 4 terms times the annual capacity, which is $2 million. So conceivably, it could be an $8 million contract when the entire term is over. Exact contract specifics are identified in the specific bid documents. And again, the numbers above are just for example purposes only. So when a prime contractor gets into seriously considering bidding on one of these contracts, these are some of the steps that they need to consider as it relates to how they approach it. First and foremost, they need to determine their direct costs. That can be done by a number of ways, but it's always recommended to analyze the CTC and specifications. When you do get serious about bidding a contract, you can pick up the bid documents, which include the current CTC that would be used for that. So you have the ability to review the prices in it. They need to basically work up some sample projects that would help them determine if they are covering their direct costs and indirect costs as it relates to, your overhead, profit expectations, bonding, insurance, things of that nature. All contracts are bid 2 factors, unless it's a specialty contract. It's normal working hours and other than normal working hours. And then step 4, as I indicated earlier, you need to consider some of your compliance requirements as it relates to equal opportunity employment and your MWB requirements that may factor into the terms of the contract. Tips for being a successful JOC contractor. I touched on it earlier, but the bid of the adjustment factor is really important, because if it doesn't cover those costs, you're going to have a real hard time trying to even generate what resembles an accurate cost proposal. One should anticipate the type of work That's not hard to do depending on what department it is. Some of it's self-explanatory, some of it you may have to make some inquiries. There's always a pre-bid meeting before every contract bid, so some of this information is covered as well as more in-depth information as it relates to analyzing your adjustment factor and trying to develop the sample projects, which leads me to my next point. Run sample projects, and staffing is an important part of it, primarily management staff. I mean, if you're the type of company that is a prime that has a lot of in-house trades, then that's great in one respect, but how the projects are managed can make or break a relationship with the client as well, because I've seen it happen. One of the preferred methods, or actually the preferred method, is taking a sample project. In this particular illustration, you had a project that you did for $82,000. You go on the price proposal based on that anticipated work that was performed, and you build that same project out of the price proposal. In this particular scenario, once you got finished building all of your cost in the price in the CTC, the total was $75,746. Well, if that $82,323 covered all of your overhead and gave you a reasonable level of profit, then you would sort of do the math at the bottom to identify what your adjustment factor would need to be. Now keep in mind, this is just one specific project. It's recommended that you would do this 2 or 3 times and vary in the type of projects that you're working on, but this is probably the most effective way to do it, especially if those original projects, all of those costs fell in line with your normal profit and overhead margins. So, but you can select to do other methods, which I'll talk about in a section. This is just a graphic of a spreadsheet that if you wanted to work up some of your own costs based on your normal operation, you could do it this way. It really has no relevance in the prior slide, but we just like to show it. So if you do cost estimating or whatever off a spreadsheet, you can do it that way. But so again, I would say don't stop there, do more than one project. It's probably recommended to do a single trade project as well as multi-trade, and vary them somewhere, you know, in various degrees of project size. As point number 2 here, you know, some project sizes could be as low as $35,000, and if you could find a couple that are in the 150 or higher range, that would be helpful as well. Other methods, you can evaluate a sampling of anticipated items. If you know that particular client does a lot of ADA type renovations, then you do some ADA type projects and do the sampling based on that. And also you can get subcontractors involved and let them evaluate their sections of the CCC. So specifically what I'm saying is if you have some subcontractor relationships with plumbers, let them look at the plumbing section in the CTC, and they can weigh in on how they feel the pricing falls in line with what they're used to and what's going on in the current market in the Chicago area. Once the contracts are awarded, as I sort of talked about in that umbrella process, the department basically reaches out to procurement services and lets them know they want to utilize their JOC program. They do have to receive prior approval. I'm not going to say it's a rubber stamp process, but they look at a couple of various factors as it relates to past performance, and I guess in some cases, if it's new, there's not going to be a lot of reference, but they do monitor compliance as it relates to the program as it goes along. And these are just sort of general steps as how it takes place, but it was also depicted in that graph. They'll get together and develop a scope of work, have a joint scope meeting. One of the key components, again, is the contractor's ability to prepare and produce a clean and auditable proposal. So they're responsible for all the material takeoffs, select the proper task items within the CTC, and at which time, when they're completed, they'll submit it to the city for review and comment and or approval. After that gets approved, then the contractor prepares what they call a final package, which in essence is a contract document. I should point out that virtually, since it's an umbrella type program, every project ultimately turns into a separate contract in the JOC process. And then lastly, the department will issue a blanket release, which is at that point a lump sum type of a program or process as it relates to completing the work. From beginning to end, on average, it takes about 35 to 45 days to get the release from start to finish to where the contractor will be ready to start work and complete the project. Getting involved with the JOC program. Well, I touched on a couple of these earlier, but you will need to, do your homework and analyze a couple of things. If you have a relationship with a contractor that's already involved, that's always a good thing to do, especially if you're a subcontractor trying to, figure out ways to get involved. As it relates to prime contractors, the most important part of that would be analyzing the work that's going to be performed and analyzing the task items in the CTC. Now, I should point out the construction task catalog, if you don't know, is a rather beefy document, and that's why it's sort of better to have some help. So if you do have some subcontractors that you're interested in using or have their ability for input, they can, take some sample references out of their section and weigh in and let you know what they think as it relates to the pricing in the category that pertains to them. Again, you can build that relationship with primes to get more information. It's not that uncommon that some people form joint ventures to get some JOC experience. It's happened on a number of occasions. Some successful, some not so. Variety of methods for subcontractors to provide a quote. Typically, they would do it on the lump sum aspect. The prices in the CTC are not geared toward subcontractors. They're geared toward the prime. So if you let a subcontractor refer to those prices and those were the ones he would charge in the prime would probably have a little bit of a challenge trying to make money. So it's okay that they're familiar with them, but the lump sum quote with material breakdown probably is the better choice, because that way whoever's developing cost proposals on behalf of the prime contractor would see all the plumber's takeoffs and would be able to relate that to the specific task in the CTC. Again, I need to emphasize JOC is a performance-based contracting system that requires a high level of quality of construction, but it's not just the construction part of it. It's virtually every aspect that we've talked about leading up to this point after the award of the contract. Just to review a couple of key points, JOC is an established procurement system used by several types of public agencies nationwide, both federal, K through 12, a lot of local municipalities. There is a national program where anybody can use a portion of JOC, but that doesn't really play into what we're talking about today. JOC has benefits for all of the parties that I talked about, the owner, the prime, as well as subcontractors. And for the prime contractors who want to submit a bid, just make sure they do their homework and necessary legwork to get an accurate adjustment factor. And also the subcontractors, just be aware of the the components that would be required for them to get that relationship involved with the prime so they can be called upon to do some work. These are some of the key contacts for procurement or the JOC program. To the right, you have my contact information. I will pass out business cards in a second. On the left, you have Byron Whitaker, the Assistant Deputy Procurement Officer, and that's his email and phone number if you feel the need to call him. Have any follow-up questions? I can also do any follow-up questions that we don't cover today if you think of something that may come up after today's presentation. So at that being the end of the presentation, I'd like to take any questions. Since you had one midway through, I'll start with you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. That's always specified in the contract documents. It typically depends on the value of the contract. So it's going to be determined and outlined in the contract documents. There's no specific limit or cutoff. So some contracts are higher than others. For example, one client or one city agency may only have $3 million annually, and another one may have $5 million annually. It's just based on the amount of work that they plan on doing, as well as the funding that they have to tie to that work. So, but getting specifically as it relates to the bond, that's a contract by contract stipulation. So.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Relative to union versus non-union work, how do we determine that?
Well, that's a great question because the city of Chicago has a PLA agreement that is tied to all of their contracts, as far as I know. And typically it means that they're all union. There is specific union requirements related to most of their contracts, including JOC. That's project labor agreement, just in case you, the people at home. Any other questions?
Contractor, so I don't bid as a prime. But one of the challenges that I encounter is that I believe the city of Chicago should post all the GCs submit our proposals, because that's one thing that it's amazing that nobody, so we're always calling people, asking who's bidding this project. Because, usually they do it by addendum 1, they do the sign-up sheet. But there's a lot of GCs who, don't attend, that they're bidding projects. So
Okay.
it's just a comment that, I wish the city of Chicago would do.
Well, that wasn't really a question, so I'm not going to answer it as a question, but I'm going to give you some advice. As I indicated in the presentation, there's a pre-bid meeting for all JOC contracts that are being advertised and soon to be bid on. My recommendation would be attend the pre-bid meeting. You can request a sign-in sheet from all the attendees. They typically just take business cards and staple them, but they will scan them and send them out to people that request them, or everybody in some instances. But
yeah, we actually post after pre-similar conference or before pre-similar conference. After that's done, we take the sign-in sheet and we do the publish or meetings like this, and we post on our website. It might be a little hard to find, but if you can email the official contact specialist or everything specialist or some of that contract, he or she should be able to guide you where to go out with.
yeah, it's out there. It's just, yeah. But it's highly recommended to attend the pre-bids. That's a good networking forum. as well as, I don't know if you were here when Irma spoke about some of the upcoming Department of Procurement Services events, but the construction forum on your sheet is a good networking forum, and not just for the JOC program, but for any construction type contracts that may be going out for the city of Chicago.
To all prospective upcoming events that not just the city has, but other sister agencies like CPA, CEHA.
Any other questions? I have one. Is anybody from an engineering firm by chance? The only reason I ask is sometimes they attend these seminars and they don't really understand the process. A&E can be tied into the JOC program, but with the city of Chicago, it's typically limited to drawings or permits that may be required to facilitate the work being performed. It's not considered to be a design build type of a method to procure construction. So since this is being streamed, I just wanted to share that just in case some potential A&E firms were in attendance. So, well, if we don't have any further questions, I'd like to thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Go Cubs.